Okay, on to video 3. This assignment was the first sort of creative writing task, and it was for Telling Tales. And Telling Tales is has been one of my favourite creative writing modules so far this year, and it's all to do with like oral storytelling and kind of that tradition and where stories have come from, where they've originated from, how they've progressed and changed. And I really enjoyed this module, and we look mainly at like fairy tales and myths and legends and Greek gods and all that kind of mythology stuff, which is really interesting. So for our assignment, we could either have done like two short stories or just one long short story. I opted for the one long short story because I did not want to write. Like, I had so many other stuff going on as well at the same time. I was like, I don't want to have to try and squeeze in 2 short stories. Like, no. So I went for and once again, 10% leeway. So I went for the 2,000 word one short story, 2,000 words option. And basically our brief for this assignment was we had to be inspired and do a modern retelling of a fairy tale. And when you do your creative writing assignments, to obviously protect against plagiarism and stuff like that, you also have to submit 2 pages of your first draft. Now, personally, when I write, I always try to write a full first draft. So when I found out I could only submit 2 pages, I was relieved. I was also annoyed because I was like, I put all this time into, but that's how I write, and I need to do a first full draft to be able to have that skeleton to work with. So it wasn't too bad, but I was a bit like, we can only submit 2 pages of the first draft, but it's changed so much since the first draft and I want to show it off. But anyway, and what you have to do, you have to annotate that those 2 pages of your first draft, but it can be anything. You can have, like, you could have submitted a page that was like brainstorms. You could do it any way you want, basically. So I just personally choose, because I have Microsoft Word, I just did electronic comments on different sections, and I talked about the research I did. Like, I looked at books to give me inspiration and talked about like what inspired me, and mainly what inspired me. I had so many different ideas for this short story. There's another idea that I really liked, but I might save it for another time. But the idea I settled on, it was actually a myth that I'd never heard of before, and it was, our lecturer is amazing. He's like, once again, all our lecturers are published, but this particular lecturer who teaches us Telling Tales, oh my gosh, I really admire his writing. I really like his writing style, and his passion, and he's so intelligent, and he knows so many languages, and he just, like, your mind is just like, whoa. He shared with us one of his published stories, and it was about child Roland, and I want to say that it is a British myth, but that might be wrong. It's kind of like it's kind of like stemmed off from the kind of era of King Arthur and all those sorts of legends and myths and stuff. And child, I researched into it, and it's spelled Childe, and it's actually a title that was given to a knight or a squire. There's many different meanings behind it, but that's one of them. And it was a story about his sister Bird, which means B-U-R-D, Bird Ellen, which means Lady Ellen, how she ends up getting taken to Elfland by the Elf King, and she's like abducted basically because she runs Widdershins, and she gets taken away to the Elf Kingdom against her will, and it's about how Roland, his older brothers, go to try and find her, and he has to go through all these different sort of, like, he has to go to this other world and try and rescue her. And anyway, my lecturer read out his story and I really liked it, but an idea came to me and I thought, well, this is really an interesting idea. Like Widdershins, I love that concept of, like, if you run, Widdershins is when if you run against the opposite direction of the sun, you will be taken to this, like, fairy kingdom place, like it's something you should never do. and I just really liked the idea of doing a modern version retelling of this, but doing it from Bird Ellen's perspective. And I got rid of the other brothers because they weren't that important in my opinion. So I actually did it. I wrote it from Bird Ellen's perspective, and I changed the story a lot. I included Merlin as like a nod to Merlin, and like he was like a kind of fake mentor character, and yeah, I just had fun with it. And I basically did about Ellen's story. She's like, her mother wants her to be like a lady. They're not actually in a wealthy situation though. They're like quite poor because her husband died at war in a crusade. Although obviously don't say crusade, I just mentioned war. And what happens is Roland becomes sick with plague, because I kind of it was inspired by the Middle Ages period for me. And Roland, her little brother, he's learned to become a knight and a squire, and he gets really sick because of plague. And her mother's like, she's always tougher on Ellen than she is to her son, and Ellen can never understand why. And she's like, you need to go get the plague, you need to go get to the village, get the doctors, otherwise your brother's going to die. But she goes to Merlin for advice, and she ends up going to Elfland of her own volition. And she has always wanted to go on quests. She dreams of all these stereotypical masculine things, and she just, she wants to go on her own big grand adventure, and she ends up getting her chance. And she goes to, Merlin's no help, and she goes to Elfland, and she meets the Elf King comes and takes her because she runs Widdershins on purpose, because she knows I need to get there to save my brother. And I kind of left it with an ambiguous ending, and hopefully it pays off. I haven't got my grades back for this story yet, but eventually she gets to Elfland, and she makes a deal with the king. She will marry him on the condition that, because his wife has died, and he's quite a sad creature, his wife has died and he's lonely, and his kingdom is dying, and he needs new blood to replenish. And she's like, I will marry you on the one condition that you save my brother. And he does, but I kind of make it an ambiguous ending. It's like years later, and he gives her this gift. She looks in this mirror and she sees her brother, and he's healed and he's bearded. So I was trying to represent the fact that he's grown up. But I leave it quite an ambiguous ending, and she's had a baby by the king, and she is married to him, and she is happy. And she kind of finally settles on the fact that she finally understands the pain her own mother went through, because it turns out that her mother before, like Roland, was the only surviving son, and she had a lot of like miscarriages, and she finally understands now that she's a mother herself. She knows why her mother was so tough on her, and she kind of becomes at peace with it. And her biggest pain and trauma for her is that she can't go back to her brother, because the king hasn't forbidden it, but she fears that if she leaves that world, she'll never be able to get back, and she can't risk losing her son. So that's why I tried to play with the idea that for my modern retelling, I don't believe that every single fairy tale needs to have a tied up ribbon ending. So that was another reason how I played with it. So that's kind of how I retold it to make it modern. I set it in a Middle Ages context, but I love that idea. I love when there's a traditional setting, but you have these strong female characters that fight against what they're meant to be. I always enjoy that. I think it's one of those timeless themes that can keep on being played with, because they're just so important and so interesting. Anyway, and it's called My Sword. So that's kind of what I did for that one. If anyone's watched this, thank you, and good luck with all your assignments. And if you have any questions, feel free to comment below. Bye.